everybody to Community Bookstore. We're delighted to be hosting this event. This is a wonderful crowd. It's a great book. So I'm going to introduce the editor of the book, Margaret, and Margaret will introduce everyone else as they read. So Margaret McMullen is the author of 7 award-winning novels, including In My Mother's House and Aftermath Lounge. She has received a National Endowment of Arts Fellowship and a Fulbright to teach in Hungary. She was the Melvin Peterson Endowed Chair in Literature at the University of Evansville before she retired to write full-time. She currently serves as faculty mentor at the Stony Brook Southampton Low Residency Program. And I also want to tell you that we are filming this evening. BRIC, Brooklyn Public Access Television, is filming tonight. So if anyone here is uncomfortable with being on camera, move to the back of the room. So without further ado, Margaret.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. And this is going to be a little awkward because now I'm going to introduce Bruce. Bruce McPherson is the publisher of Every Father's Daughter, which on Sunday, Parade Magazine said was a sizzling summer read. I was just sharing this with Alexandra, and it's a very bizarre category to put in. We will take it. And it's also a very good Father's Day gift. But let me introduce to you Bruce McPherson because I do want you to meet him. He's the founding editor and publisher of McPherson and Company, an independent literary and arts press located in New York's Hudson Valley. In 2010, he published Jamie Gordon's 4th novel, Lord of Misrule, which received the 2010 National Book Award for fiction. He's also the publisher of Every Father's Daughter. Here's Bruce McPherson.
Thank you. I will be pretty brief, I think. So,
Yeah.
About 2 years ago, I got an email, and I get a lot of emails. I'm what's known as a small publisher, meaning that I only do a few books a year. And so I'm very well defended. Almost always I say no, thank you very much. In this case, I saw the address said Evansville EDU. I didn't know Margaret, I'd never heard of her, but I was intrigued because I went to high school in Evansville, Indiana, which is the southernmost point in Indiana. It's farther south than Louisville. And when I was 17, I left Indiana, and I thought that's the end. I wasn't originally from there. I was stuck there for high school. I had a great education. I was happy to leave. But I was intrigued because I hadn't been back. And so I opened this up, and I saw that this was an anthology, which is one of the more difficult kinds of books to publish. But it had an absolutely amazing list of writers. The subject was something dear to my heart. I'm a father, I have a daughter, and I thought maybe this is worth investigating. So in short order, Margaret and I exchanged emails and then had a long telephone conversation, and I felt that I could work with her on this project, and I can't tell you how pleased and glad I am that I did, because I think we're making this quite a success, or I should say, we've done what is necessary for this to allow this book to be a success, the success that it is, thanks to the authors who were involved in this. And it is an extraordinary group. And the essays, short and long, I think are most extraordinary for the absolute honesty, the presentation of one of the more difficult subjects to write about: family relationships, and in particular the relationship between fathers and daughters. So now I'm going to turn you back to Margaret, and she will introduce the readers, and she will read herself, I do believe.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you. read. Do you want to come up front?
Yeah.
Yes, please. And what is it about the New Yorkers? They think Evansville is south. We're going to Mississippi. That's south. I'm just going to, instead of telling you about the making of this book, I pretty much talk about it in the foreword, so I'll just read a little bit from the foreword. After a prolonged illness, my father died on a chilly spring day when the lilacs had just started to bloom. In that last month of his life, when he could no longer talk, we learned to communicate in other ways. I cooked for him, fed him, clipped his nails. He thanked me by putting his hand on my head. What there was to say, we had already said. In those last days, I read essays, poems, and stories to him. I read other people's words. What I read to my father and what I wanted to read after he died became the genesis of this anthology. My father was born the eldest son of 4 in 1934 in Lake, Mississippi, and raised in Newton, Mississippi. He broke his nose playing high school football and went on to attend the University of Mississippi in Oxford. As an undergraduate, my father once had drinks with William Faulkner at the Peabody Hotel in Memphis. They were both waiting to catch a train that would take them back to Oxford. They got to talking about horse trading. Learned either from people or books, my father knew about empathy. He never made fun of people. His narratives about people were underlined with dignity, grace, honor, and humor. I like to think that my father learned about character from the master that night at the Peabody Hotel. I often told him if he hadn't gone into finance, he'd have been a writer. About a year after he graduated from college, he broke up with a girl from the Mississippi Delta, and to recover, he visited his sister in Washington, D.C. She threw a party, served a vodka punch, and my father met an exotic Ingrid Bergman beauty named Madeline. That night, after the party, my father told his sister that woman, Madeline, was the woman he wanted to marry. 3 days later, my father proposed marriage in a car he borrowed from Senator James Eastland, staring at Eastland's cigar stuffed out in the car's ashtray as he did so. He spoke no more than he needed to. When I think of my father in the time before he became my father, he seems marvelously determined and ready to get the hell started with his life. My father always appreciated a straightforward narrative. It took a certain amount of imagination and courage to marry my mother, Madeline, a woman who had escaped the Nazis in Vienna, Austria, and who worked for the CIA in Washington. She was nothing like any woman he had ever known. She became the love of his life, he hers, and they stayed married for the next 54 years. Once, a man who knew my parents told me when he heard the way my mother say my father's name, Shimmy for Jimmy, he knew how difficult it would be to find a woman who would say his own name in that in-love way. After my sister and I were born, and after a short period selling farm equipment at his father's International Harvester tractor store in Newton, my father joined Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner, and Smith in Jackson, Mississippi as an account executive in 1961. One evening, my parents attended an outdoor Joan Baez concert in Jackson. It was about 1964, and my father loved Joan Baez. And that night, he laughed when he saw her stick her tongue out at Look and Life magazine photographers. People parked in a big open field, and afterwards, a young man from out of state couldn't start his station wagon. My father offered a jump start. The two spoke briefly. Where was he headed? My father asked. Meridian, he said. My father told the young man he grew up near there. The station wagon started, and the two went their separate ways. Later, my father recognized both the station wagon and the young man in the newspapers. The young man my father recognized was Michael Schwerner, one of the civil rights workers murdered in Philadelphia, Mississippi. The FBI found that burned-out station wagon before they found the bodies. There were other factors beside the nightmarish racial conflicts that led my father away from Mississippi, a place he loved more than any other place. His decision to leave wasn't easy, but in the end, my father was ready to get us away from the violence, the hate, the confines, the restrictions, and some would say the advantages of growing up in a state amongst all his extended family. My father survived and even thrived away from the South in Chicago, despite the snowstorms and the impossible Dow Jones Industrial Average of the 1970s. He found his footing in that perilous place, nicknamed the Windy City, the city where Binks felt genie souls perched on his shoulders in Walker Percy's novel, The Moviegoer. Maybe my father found his own genie soul there, somewhere within Chicago's muscular skyline and market fluctuations. In the 1980s, I moved from Chicago to New York to write the entertainment pages for Glamour magazine. One February, my father called to say he was coming to town on business, and I told him to pack his tux. I had special tickets to a CBS Records party. The invitation they sent was printed on a white glove. This was 1984. Our cab let us out on the street because the road was blocked off to the Museum of Natural History. Behind police barricades, crowds of people stood outside the sub-zero weather, in the sub-zero weather. My father put on a white glove with the invitation printed on the palm. When he held up his gloved hand, the police allowed us through and the sea of people parted. Once inside, my father shook hands with Michael Jackson and Brooke Shields, who stood together inside a dinosaur skeleton. We were all there to celebrate the historic success of the album Thriller. Years later, whenever my father told friends about that evening, what he stressed more than anything was how the NYPD let us through because of that one white glove. He laughed and said he never felt more powerful. I knew my father in many ways, in the South and in the North, through the stories he told me, the places we visited, the food we ate, and through the music we listened to. Anything by Johnny Cash, Hank Williams, Emmylou Harris, and George Jones way before they became hip. But I knew my father best when we talked about books. When we talked about a book, any book, he talked easily and about anything. When we talked about a book, we always talked about important things. When my father was diagnosed with inoperable brain cancer in June of 2010, he told me he didn't want a lot of weeping and wailing. Let's just take this as it comes, he said. Let's not get all emotional. When I was 45, he said, and I had my first heart bypass, I asked myself, why me? Well, now I'm 75. Why not me? We were careful with words. We never used the C word. It was mass or images and sometimes spots. We stayed positive. We thought of the next meal. We considered dessert. We talked about what we would read next. My balance is off. That was his only complaint. And it was hardly a complaint, just a statement of fact. He even said it like, so what? I'm not 100%, but so what? For him, the days were always beautiful. I always looked great. My food tasted wonderful. People were so nice. What should we read today? Time took on a sacred quality. Consequently, stories and good writing played a huge part in my father's final days as they had in his life. Every morning we began with the paper, reading from the opinion pages of the New York Times. By noon, we were on to Henry Miller's Book of Friends, stories by Mark Richard, Alice Munro, William Faulkner, Willie Morris, or Eudora Welty. Then lunch, a nap, tea, the PBS NewsHour with a glass of wine through a straw, dinner, a little poetry, and an old movie. One night, W.H. Auden led to a Marilyn Monroe movie, followed by Gerald Manley Hopkins' Pied Beauty, ending the evening with that wonderful last line, praise him. After my father died, I couldn't read or write, perhaps because in the end my father was unable to read or write. I didn't know it then, but I was looking for this book, a collection of intensely personal essays written by great women writers telling me about their fathers and how they came to know their fathers. I wanted to read this anthology, but it didn't exist. Writers write the book they want to read, editors do the same. Eventually, I contacted the authors I loved and admired, some of them friends of my father's. I never wanted this to feel like an assignment, but I suppose it was. I simply asked these women to tell me about their fathers. They took it from there. For some authors, the idea of writing about a father just clicked, and they wrote their essays often within days of the request. James Smiley said, "Give me 3 days," and sent it in 3 days. We all have stories about our fathers, even if it's a bad story or a non-story. It's a story. If you write, you will read these essays and feel the need to write your own. There are many kinds of fathers represented here in this collection: shadowy, attentive, absent, abusive, overpowering, loving, charming, gentle, violent. Some fathers are a mixture. There are reoccurring themes here too. The fact that a father is often seen as a link to the outside world, to the marketplace, to out there, is balanced against a daughter's need to please and be loved. In myth, and even in history, women tend not to murder their fathers, literally. They tend to care for them. This anthology had to include and end with Alice Munro's gorgeous essay, Working for a Living, which she gave to us, which I read to my father in that last month of his life. My father loved anything by Alice Munro, and we especially appreciated the stunning essay because of Munro's nuanced writing and because of all the work that she does show in Canada. Like many of these writers, I know I'll be writing about my father always. Our stories don't stop, even when lives end. Reading these essays was both painful and uplifting. Reading these writers, recollecting their fathers, helps me call up my own. And I remember him all over again. And in my mind, he lives. Now I would like to introduce to you a very dear friend and the cornerstone of this anthology, Philip Lopate. He's the author, of course, as you all know, for Essay Collections and the editor of the big tome, Art of the Personal Essay. Some of his other books include To Show and to Tell, The Craft of Literary Nonfiction, The Rug Merchant, Two Marriages, Waterfront, Notes on Sontag, and at the end of the day, Selected Poems. He's currently director of the Nonfiction MFA program at Columbia University, where he teaches. Philip Lopate.
Thank you. It's such a thrill to see so many friends, relatives, acquaintances, and so on here. And I'm going to read just briefly for my introduction because I'm going to give a chunk of my time over to my daughter so she can read a little longer. That's what fathers do. What is it about the relationship between fathers and daughters that provides so much exquisite tenderness, satisfying communion, longing for more, idealization from both ends, followed often, if not inevitably, by disappointment, hurt, and the need to understand and forgive, or to finger the guilt of not understanding and loving enough? The bar is set very high from the start. Fathers tend to find their young daughters infinitely cute, adorable, incarnating the essence of all that draws these men to the feminine, without the intimidating judgmental scrutiny and moral character of the adult women who are now their partners in parenting. Later, once these daughters reach adolescence and beyond, they may scrutinize their fathers in equally excruciating detail. Speaking as a father of a daughter, I can testify that there may be no comparable affection as intense or all-consuming. That does not mean that I fail to note her flaws or can rise above irritation in the face of her intermittent panics, tantrums, or self-absorptions. It simply means that I adore her. Do fathers and daughters understand each other? Yes and no. We see from Shakespeare's greatest play, King Lear, that even the most loving filial loyalty may be misconstrued. Reading the superbly written, empathetic, insightful set of personal essays in this volume by daughters about their fathers, which run the gamut from portraits of successful businessmen and civic-minded heroes to shady con artists and failures, from the most patiently paternal to the most neglectful, I am struck by the persistent note of missed connection. These father figures, even the most loving, and devoted often seem so strangely distant, so abstract and unreachable. Perhaps because I experience myself as perfectly ordinary and transparent on a day-to-day basis, including those moments when I interact with my daughter, I am flummoxed by the mystery and remoteness with which the fathers here seem to be imbued. As a father put on the defensive, I am tempted to ask, paraphrasing Freud's famous question, what do these daughters want? Some of the distance may simply be accounted for by the differences between men and women, what used to be called, euphemistically or not, the battle of the sexes. Some of that distance may be ascribed to the generation gap. Many of the fathers described here belong more to that generation that fought in World War II or the Korean War and came back home taciturn about their war experiences. It is noteworthy how often the fathers are characterized as movie star handsome, especially from the looking up angle of girlhood, and how many of these matinee idols subsequently took to drink. Meanwhile, their daughters were coming to consciousness in a different order. The world of their fathers is a bygone world, quaint and unquestionably patriarchal. Some of the essays honestly portray a daughter's competition with her father's workplace, or her rivalry with the other siblings, or her mother for her father's undivided love. She may have winced at the easy camaraderie her brothers had with their father. She may have rejoiced, however discreetly, at the sense that she was getting her father's inner nature more than her mother had. Not a few of the authors here opted for the role of daddy's girl, proudly bonding with the father over the mother. It is not an easy thing under any circumstance to write about loved ones. There are boundaries of privacy to consider. It is so difficult to get the exact distance, the proper perspective, to appreciate a family member without sentimentalizing or idealizing, to be truthful about a parent's defects without indulging in daddy dearest exposés. And now we're going to turn it over to my daughter, but you need to introduce her.
I need to introduce her. And also, there's a wonderful interview between Lily and Philip on the website The Millions, and they've just sort of devoted that the front page to every father's daughter and discussion between Lily and Philip. Lily Lopate is currently a student at Bryn Mawr College, editor at By College News, and editor-in-chief of the literary magazine Reflections. And she's currently interning this summer at People magazine. Lily Lopate.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to read a few sections. I wrote a section essay. So, a relationship of words. I often wonder when I meet my first real boyfriend, or even years into the future when I am engaged to my fiancé, how I will describe my father. How will I give my guy a glimpse into our unique relationship? How will I narrate the experience of being a daughter and the influence of having a writer as a father? What liberties will I take in framing him as a character? Who's to know the parts I'll omit, the parts I'll embellish? Would I dare to embark on an accurate portrayal? And how will I know if this guy sitting across from me in a cafe asking about my life story is worth it? Say we date for 2 months, and as we drive on the turnpike to meet my parents, he probes for some family background. He wants stories that showcase how I am a product of my parents. Will I make the effort to reveal the complex narrative of my father and me? Supposing he's a swell guy with a decent IQ, a man I imagine myself to be semi-in love with, I decide to take the gamble. Tell the guy, as my father would say, the truth. But where to begin? The conversationalist. My father is above all else easy to talk to. He engages you in stimulating conversation, proposes theories and facets about your character, and responds to your stories with playful interest. Mid-sentence, he furrows his brows and a cunning smile forms at his lips. My father, always a proponent of words, aims for a high level of conversing, and believes any interaction can be wielded towards maximum amusement. He is also a grammarian, was drilling me about the uses of I and me, neither and nor, and subject clause agreements. When I increased the number of likes I used in my sentences, he mocked, "Do you mean you like arrived at the house or you arrived at the house?" He was unimpressed when I said the reason for using likes was generational. Be above your generation. My father is a nonconformist. He never wears jeans because he feels they are ubiquitous. He questions flaunting Abercrombie and Fitch across your breast pockets. Fashion forward or not, these are his principles. Unlike him, I conform, to an extent. I strive for normalcy. He, on the other hand, argues normal is not an option. Is that your highest goal? To strive for normalcy? Attempt to be like everyone else? I worry if I break from the fabric of my generation, I will be too isolated, a castaway on my own island. My dad is far too stubborn to have the social anxiety. At 70, he is a man who's made peace with himself. What's so bad about being alone? Great things can come from learning to live with yourself. I don't know if I'm ready for that lesson in isolation. Myself is not yet cultivated to find contentment in my own company. Words have created such an open dialogue between us, he never has to work too hard to pry information out of me. He confesses when his teaching has lost its energy, or he struggles to sustain a friendship, and I complain about my fellow 20-somethings and their skittish hesitance to speak a sentence that conveys what they're actually thinking. I expect words to carry meaning, be surprising, embody a certain lyricism, but not everyone is a skilled conversationalist. Words can solve the mystery many parents seem to face, wondering what their kids are thinking. Even in a wordless exchange, my father can prove psychic. Am I just that predictable? It's unnerving how quickly and accurately my father can read me. His analysis of my contradictions, ambivalences, and yearnings are spot on. He knows I frequently check my internal temperature and hover around a baseline of dissatisfaction. I worry my face gives all my secrets away. He sees right through my feigned attempts at easygoing flexibility, especially when I meet new people. While I waited for my college roommate to be assigned, I speculated, and he succinctly summarized my wariness as, "I'm prepared to dislike you. Expose yourself." Even if he can guess, he still continues to ask what I'm thinking. It's a question that's been bred into me. I ask it to myself. I answer honestly, knowing he will appreciate the unsettled ambiguity of my thoughts. On boys and self-presentation. Similarly, on the topic of boys, he loves to mock my misjudgments, the cycle of unrequited crushes I had growing up, all of whom I felt I could improve, airheads with potential. "Well, Lily, you really know how to pick 'em," he'd say. But he confessed to similar infatuations. In his late 30s, a therapist told him, "Philip, if only you could apply a tiny percentage of your intelligence to your choice of women." So now he advises, "Have you ever considered a more bookish boy? Perhaps, maybe one who shares your sense of humor." It's such a radical proposal. I may need another round of airheads before I take it to heart. Our competitive streak. My father and I are slightly competitive. Since he is my encyclopedia, my literary database, I weigh my intelligence against his. We joke that years into the future we will challenge each other to a trivia game spanning a multitude of subjects, from books to geography, philosophy, and religion, with a pad of paper to keep score. I used to try and forecast the age when my brain would ripen just enough so that I could trump him in certain areas. Today, at 19, I know more about Descartes and Gilbert Ryle, TI-84 calculators, and computer systems, he says, than he ever did. I'm filled with a giddy sense of victory when I know an answer to a crossword clue about movies, music, or pop culture. Before I acquired my competitive drive, he practiced the art of losing. When I was a little kid, he'd always cheat, so I'd win our games of War and Go Fish, He'd pretend to cry, wrinkling his cheeks and balling up his fist, praising my cunning card strategy. I'd wipe his fake tears and he'd tickle me with his long fingers. My dad can transition from confidant to father knows best advisor to professor. He is a mentor but not a friend. He is the coach for whom I aim to excel. I play devil's advocate asking him, if I wasn't your daughter, would you still think I'm smart? It's a trick question with an impossible answer. His response never lets me see how much his unconditional love may cloud an otherwise critical, unbiased judgment. You are smart, and you are my daughter. There is a code of respect which prevents us from speaking as equals, and yet we raise awareness about each other's flaws or shortcomings. Sometimes we agree to disagree, arguing like great debaters, poking holes in each other's logic and demanding substantiating evidence. My father and his fame. They love me, Lily, I'm a star, he reports, elated with the success of his recent reading. When my father returns home from a successful writing gig, he is on cloud 9. Always happy to be back in New York, he feels invigorated. When he walks through the door, he encounters real life. I type on my laptop, the cats lounge by the window, my mom folds laundry. It's a lackluster environment full of family members who are not hankering for his autograph. He announces himself at the doorway, beaming in his blue Armani suit. The crowd just ate me up. That's great, honey, my mom will reply in an automated voice as she flips through her calendar and offers him a beer. You are a star, Dad. Shine bright, shine far. I offer sarcastically. Philip, I want to hear more about your trip, but could you take out the garbage? My mom says, walking upstairs. Out of the corner of my eye, I can see my dad's face deflate. These moments are an endorsement of his career. Why should he have to surrender them so quickly to the daily round? He pets his favorite tabby cat on the head, propped on the edge of our kitchen counter, and nudges her delicate ear with his thumb. I know you don't believe it, but it's true. Your dad's a celebrity of sorts. Hey, you're no Justin Timberlake or Rachel McAdams, I say. True, he would agree. I'm just myself. Outside of the tiny world of essay writers, no big deal. His honest, self-deprecating humility always had a way of turning my wave of gloating into guilt. The idea that my father was a well-known public figure in the essay world seemed at first too bizarre to take seriously. Seeing his books on the shelves of my professors was always strange and made me oddly skeptical. Can't they find another figure? Another father figure of the essay? Why are they photocopying excerpts from his book? Once a gorgeously handsome Spaniard came to interview my dad about a project, and I asked after he left, what did he want with you? Marveling at the Spaniard's chiseled chin, I found it hard to grasp why he would seek the company of someone like my dad over myself. Until a rave review was printed in the Times for his new book, I denied my dad's fame. He didn't deserve the continual applause in my mind, because the public perception of Philip Lopate was not all he was. I like to think his identity is not solely wrapped up in his profession, but rather is a decoupage of influences, from dead authors to baseball, to city sidewalks, to whitefish, latkes, and kosher varnishes. And above all, us. I've grown to adopt a facetiously cool air. Who? Oh, that guy. Philip Lopate. Yeah, I know him. In a creative nonfiction class, his book was assigned as our primary textbook. In the campus bookstore, my friend grabbed 2 copies off the shelf. Here, don't you need one? You know, strangely enough, I already have one. The girl nodded as if impressed with my organizational skills. I felt no need to brag about the autographed copy that rested on my windowsill or the intimacy with which I knew the author. When his essay against joie de vivre was recently ranked in the top 10 essays since 1950, alongside James Baldwin and Susan Sontag, I couldn't help but kid him. Congrats, Dad. I guess I should read that essay. Must be some good shit. In reality, I am his biggest secret fan. On similarities and differences. I have my father's hands, with long lean fingers that can stretch a full scale on the piano. I have my father's toes, especially a stubby middle one that is crooked and hides shyly behind the others. Up until the age of 14, I chewed my tongue just like him. We both grasp the air with our hands when we're struggling to express an idea. Our lips move steadily when we type. We both print and kill trees. We justify a fear of the unknown by thinking about the story it will give us to tell. Neither of us pushes moral platitudes, but unlike him, I am more likely to screen a call, less abrupt in ending a phone conversation, less concise in emails, and less decisive when shopping. I do not promise I will never tell white lies. We are both liberal Democrats, New Yorkers, and contemplatives. I am my father, and I am also a very distinct being myself. On small victories and daily disappointments. My dad understands far better than anyone my degrees of discontentment. I often find myself identifying with the Chekhov character Masha in The Seagull, who announces solemnly, "I am in mourning for my life." He listens when I tell him how I feel some essential element is lacking in my life. And he reminds me of Peggy Lee singing, "Is That All There Is?" as an account of unmet expectations. I tell him I have a bittersweet mentality I can't seem to shake. He gives me a look with kind eyes and tells me, "That's the trouble with sensitive people. You're always thinking. You're exposed to life." But even in moments of loneliness or emptiness, a sensitive person's best bet is to find amusement in the crevices of discontentment. I ask him if he thinks happiness is a construct. He pulls at a roll of his chin and offers, "I don't believe it's a complete fabrication. You just need to redefine your expectations to fit a more reasonable ideal." But I don't want to lower my standards. I want to experience the extraordinary. Yes, but happiness isn't like a burst of confetti. It's more like a groundhog. You have to entertain the possibility of seeing its shadow. Come across it and let it influence you. I pause digesting his words. I feel enlightened and displeased with his offering. "Lily, I have to finish some emails. I don't know what to tell you. Find hope in the idea of rare happiness." When I stress about the future and speculate what society will make of me, he tells me there is no sense in prediction. "Why do you always ask me these impossible questions? What makes you think I have the answers? You want a guarantee for what your life will be like, or a movie trailer. Enjoy the suspense of not knowing." Still, I push further. "People say just be yourself, but that's not very specific." People. Who are these people, Lily? People employ a vague vocabulary when they themselves don't know. Why be so gullible? I laugh at the thought of fully grown adults fumbling around with neon question marks suspended above their heads. "Maybe I should go out and find myself," I ask wistfully. I hate that expression, "find yourself." What a cop-out. Your identity isn't a misplaced glove that you dropped on the subway platform. You never lost yourself to begin with, so what do you expect to find?
Thank you so much, Lily. Thank you so much. One of the things that Bruce McPherson did for Every Father's Daughter was brilliant. He had, in front of everybody's essay, he has the author photo, but he also had the authors go look for photos of themselves with their fathers. Alexandra Styron's photo, you're very brave. She sent the most. She went through her family photo album, and unbeknownst, I think, to your editor or to your agent, sent the most adorable little naked picture of herself. She's small, little baby, little baby with her father, and it's just adorable, and both kind of squinting in the sun. I love that picture so much, so thank you so much for sharing so much. Alexandra Styron is the author of Reading My Father, and a novel, All the Finest Girls. A graduate of Barnard College and the MFA program at Columbia University, her work has appeared in the New Yorker, the New York Times, Vanity Fair, the Financial Times, and the Wall Street Journal. She currently teaches memoir writing in the MFA program at Hunter College. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much for including me in this lovely book, Margaret, and in the incredible company of the Lopates, father and daughter. And thank you to Ezra and Stephanie, my favorite neighborhood bookstore. I lost my daughter this morning in a kind of terrifying classic. She's 10, and I let her and her friend go from our house on 3rd Street to get crepes this morning. And I told them they could go to the new crepe place on President Street. And while they were gone, her friend's father showed up to pick her friend up. And I said, oh, I told them they could go to the crepe place on President and 7th. And after about 10 minutes, I got a text from him saying they're not here. And I had that kind of awful rising panic that happens to every parent when they start to let their children go off by themselves. And I made a pass through the neighborhood, and the first place I came to was the Community Bookstore, and I stuck my head in and I said, Ezra, have you seen my daughter? And he had not, but he said, I'll look for her. And I thought, I found her, by the way. She had gone to a different crepe shop in the other part of town, and we spent about half an hour hysterically looking for them. But I did feel as I was walking away from here that it is bookstores and community stores that are the heart and soul of our neighborhood, and I knew that if I had had to keep looking, it would be a bookstore like Ezra and Stephanie's that would join the hunt. I am going to read from the tail end of this piece that Margaret chose, which is from the beginning of my book, Reading My Father, and is at its heart, I guess, about the for better or worse, the genesis of all storytelling. I grew up in northwestern Connecticut, and so it begins with a description of Connecticut. The house in Connecticut was, once upon a time, part of a gentleman's farm. The half-dozen acres purchased by my mother and father include a traditional 19th century colonial, the Little House Cottage, and several smaller buildings, all set into a gentle slope in the state's western hills. The improvements they made to the big house, including the addition of what we still call the new or big living room to distinguish it from the old living room near the front door. Built from reclaimed wood and surfaced with rough stucco, the high-ceilinged room is light-filled and rustically elegant. A series of glass doors runs along one wall. An oversized fireplace is flanked by bookshelves, and a built-in bar made of soft pine dominates one corner. The big living room was Daddy's domain. Here he read, watched the news, clinked the ice around his scotch glass, and hid from the rest of us. During the day, he wrote in his study in the little house, but when evening came, he'd set his manuscript pages up at the bar and pace the gold shag carpet, making revisions to the day's work with Mozart blaring on the hi-fi. Around the corner, the TV room was a passageway of sorts, littered with toys and pet hair. It connected via an elbowed hallway to the kitchen. Most days, I saw little of Daddy. Before school, I was careful not to wake him, nor would I have dreamt of disturbing him in the afternoon. So it was sometimes not until he came out to prepare dinner or sharpen his pencils that I ever got a glimpse of him. First came the tinny click of the living room door latch, which let me know he was coming. Then a multi-part glottal clearing. Finally, his profile hoving into view, just about parallel to the television. Albert, he'd say, if he was in the mood to linger for a moment, have you heard about the man? This was one of Daddy's stories. He didn't really talk to me much, like a regular person might, but he had a few stories, and he liked to watch my reaction when he told them. The man, according to Daddy, was some sort of homicidal maniac. He roamed New York, killing innocent people, parents, children, the occasional fluffy dog. And then he chopped them up, stuffing their parts into big green garbage bags. With sacks on his back, he made the 90-mile trip to Roxbury, Connecticut on foot. Then he stored his victims' remains in the attic of our house. It's true, Daddy would say, passing back the other way while I tried aggressively to ignore him. They're looking for him, I just saw it on the news. It wasn't clear to me why the man chose Lone Spruce Farm, as our place was once called, as his boneyard. Maybe the man was related to the farmer's son. Maybe they were just friends drawn together by their horrible fetishes. The farmer's son, another stone-cold killer my father knew all about, had grown up in our house. Evil to his marrow, the boy, and in my mind he remained a boy, liked to torture animals. Squirrels, cats, chickens, small things you'd find on a place like ours. After they were dead, he too kept and stored his quarry. But the farmer's son didn't use the attic, which could be reached only by a set of stairs that began just, but the farmer's son didn't use the attic, which could be reached only by a set of stairs that began just outside my bedroom door. Instead, he favored the dreaded basement. Naturally, my big brother liked to get in on this act. He was always convincing me I needed to go down to the bowels of the house, where we had an extra fridge and an old ping pong table my mother used to wrap presents on. Mom left you a toy, that thing you really wanted. I swear, Mommy would say. Then he'd slam the door and turn the lights off just to hear me scream. Beyond our house, the countryside pulsed with plenty of other dangers. Not 5 miles away, in a bedlam that filled my worst dreams, lived hundreds of residents of the Southbury Training School, a state institution for the mentally retarded. I'd never actually been inside, and I'd only ever seen a few of the inhabitants, but their asymmetrical faces and helter-skelter movements gave me some particular ideas about life inside the big brick buildings up on the hill. When we drove by the rolling campus, I gripped the door handle and pushed myself back into the car seat. Some of the really dangerous ones, Daddy liked to tell me, they escape and do vile things. I watched the men and women, retards we cheerfully called them, crossing the campus's green lawn, scattering the geese that hung around near the pond at the edge of the road. They can't help it, my father continued, a trace of a smile forming around the edges of his mouth. They're imbeciles, deranged. I didn't really believe in the man, and the farmer's son seemed like a bit of a stretch too. But I couldn't be sure. Uneasiness was the name of the game, especially when my mother was away. Daddy's stories had a way of taking root then, fed by everything else that was not right, till my fears had grown into jungle weed. In my bed at night, I lay paralyzed, listening. The banging shut of the storm door below me, the screeching of the little house door up the hill, the rumble and click of a dying car engine drifted in from the road, followed by smart closing of a car door and footfalls. The man in his carnage menaced, then receded, replaced by a truer sound. A woman, her voice captured in the cold, still air, and my father's whiskey-tongued welcome. With a pillow over my head, I squeezed my eyes shut. The week's rages. I can't stand it anymore. Oh, Bill, please don't be that way. Fuck you, I'm leaving. No, please don't. Filling the void of sound. Lifting my head and sucking air, I searched the cerulean underside of my canopy bed for a spot to drift into, a place to take me away. The hours ground on until the car on the road pulled away in the dawn. Like lots of girls, I had a passion for horses. No amount of bucking and tossing from Gino, the pony I inherited from my sister Polly, could dampen my enthusiasm. When I was about 7, Gino was moved from the pasture at the bottom of our hill to a proper horse farm, and I was dropped there after school, on weekends, and nearly every day during vacations. As I got older, I took the sport to another level. Honing my skill with one trainer and then another, I spent the weekends competing, kept an eye on my ranking, and hung my ribbons in row after row around my room. I loved horses, plain and simple. I loved hanging around their stalls, talking to them as I brushed the burrs from their fuzzy coats. Loved nuzzling my face into their chests, braiding their manes, and picking the dirt from their hooves. I loved riding bareback down to the river and easing in for a cold swim. I loved trail rides and picnics and sitting on the fence watching the horses kick up their heels when you let them loose after a night in the barn. I loved the lessons, the sweat, the competition, even the fear. but most of all, I loved life at the barn. The places I rode weren't fancy. Our corner of Connecticut was back then a simple place. It was rural and largely middle class. The farms were not manicured, nor had they yet been sold off to slake the coming craving for McMansions. My best friend Laura was also a rider. Together we'd exercise our horses, then exercise a half dozen others. We mucked out stalls, groomed and swept, cleaned our tack, and hauled down hay bales, shared our lunch with the dogs, and played practical jokes on our teachers. Everything I longed for, camaraderie and ease, ritual, simplicity, came together on long days at the barn. Going home was a crapshoot. I never knew what I'd find. My father didn't like horses much, and he really didn't like his children riding them. My mother always said this is why he didn't come to my horse shows more often. It frightened him to watch me flying over huge fences on the back of an 800-pound animal. It was also why she said he wouldn't buy me a better horse, though the problem with the one I had was his tendency to try to kill me. The logic here was not something Daddy was interested in, and his distaste for the whole enterprise might have sown the seed for the story of his I remember best. I was 8. Daddy called me into the kitchen. We were alone in the house, and having just made himself a late lunch, he sat with his burger and beer, reading the New York Times. "Al," he said, his head still in paper, "do you know who Ella Grasso is?" "Yes," I replied, standing at attention, a little blossom of pride blooming within me. "She's the new governor." Daddy nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I've just read something terrible. It seems that Governor Grasso has banned horses in the state of Connecticut." The beat that followed was long enough for him to silently recheck the facts of the article. He put the paper down and tendered a look of paternal sympathy. "I'm afraid we're going to have to sell your pony to the glue factory." I remember a tingling around my lips. My legs wobbled. I waited for him to laugh. "Come on, Daddy. That's not true." "Yes, most certainly is," he replied. "That's so stupid," I pushed on, grinning dumbly. "Well, I'm sorry, Al, but that's how it is." Playful and bold, I grabbed for the newspaper. "Let me see." "No," he growled. "Now cut it out. Get out of here." I went back to the TV room, curled up on the couch, and looked at the screen. Later, when Daddy passed through, I tried one more time to draw a retraction from him. There might have been humor in his eyes, but I couldn't be sure, and I didn't press it. I knew only that the game, or whatever it was older. When I got older, Daddy's stories became my own. I took the man and the farmer's son and Ella Grasso's injunction against horses and made them into little set pieces. And I dined out on them frequently, in dorm rooms, at dinner parties, on dates. This ghoulish scenario seemed to satisfy the question, "So, what was it like having William Styron for a father?" which often hovered when I got to know new people. The great man at home then was eccentric, dark, and cruelly funny. His transgressive behavior and his wicked imagination shocked people, but they also stoked a romantic idea about the private lives of famous writers in general, and Bill Styron in particular. The last time I told my father's ghost stories was at his memorial service, February 2nd, 2007. His death, when it happened, had been a long time coming. I'm not ashamed to say that when he breathed his last, it was a relief. Still, I was surprised by how shaken I was at the graveyard, watching my brother lower the box of ashes into its small, deep hole. And I sobbed while that soldier played taps. But within days, our family had begun to plan a celebration of Daddy's life, a party to which my mother could at last invite everyone. I knew without a doubt that I wanted to write something. It seemed natural since writing is what I do. It would be an opportunity for closure, as they say in grief speak. And then I would be really seriously free from this whole freaking deal. On a messy, sleet-drenched day, more than 800 people filed into St. Bartholomew's Church in Manhattan. President Clinton, Senator Kennedy, Mike Nichols, Carlos Fuentes, and Bob Loomis would be offering remembrances. Daddy's best friend, Peter Matheson, was delivering the eulogy. Meryl Streep and Mia Farrow were among the readers of Daddy's work, and my siblings had chosen works by Rumi, Faulkner, and Mary Oliver. I'd spent a week or so fussing over my words, but through all the revisions, my first line remained the same. "My father used to scare the crap out of me," I declared. The lurid stories I chose that day were selective, omitting a couple that my husband Ed thought were actually too awful to get a laugh. And after I told them, I wondered aloud why he had done it. Why would a grown man scare his children so completely? He had told similar tales to each of my siblings, and every one of them had a different twist. Was it catharsis? Was he blowing off steam after a day grappling with all those barbarous slavers and Nazis who inhabited his books, real-life maniacs on the loose inside his head? Or was it a ham-fisted attempt at fatherhood? Was he just a dad with a faulty radar trying to make a connection? The answer that I settled on reflected what I believed was a deeper truth. Whether he meant to or not, Daddy taught us the lesson, a lesson which tested him hard at the end of his days, that life requires courage and a sense of humor. Now that he was gone, I had to wonder not why my father told the stories, but why I told them. Why was this narrative, as hokey as a 50s TV show, the one that I was stuck on? There was something disingenuous about it. These hoaxes, and the way I described them, implied that a certain lightheartedness ruled the day in our house, and that it was a Roald Dahl sort of a place, and that Daddy, curmudgeonly and outrageous, was still at the core a comic figure, which really couldn't have been further from the truth. Even before Darkness Visible opened a window onto my father's personal history, I encountered people who appeared to know more. Strangers often seem hip to some broad and unsavory secret, though they never said it outright. It must have been hard, they would say vaguely, putting a physical ellipsis to the conversation by rhythmically, knowingly nodding their heads. It must have been hard, ... Or they would laugh a little too loudly, maybe touch my shoulder, smile, and shake their heads. Sympathetic gestures all, but they often hit quite wide of the mark. Retelling Daddy's stories was, I guess, my way of managing that false intimacy by providing satisfying tidbits. They kept me from heading into territory I didn't want to explore, and they preserved a myth I was obviously as invested in as anyone. Thank you.